Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai ki te hui o Wellington Region Waste Management and Minimisation Plan Joint Committee I tēnei rā. Welcome everybody to today's meeting. We're going to open up with a karakia. Can we get that brought up on the screen? Feel free to join in, me karakia tātou. Whakatake te hau ki te uru, whakatake te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hia ki ana te atākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Okay, moving on to apologies. We've received a few apologies from Councillor Duthie, Helena and Cretney. I move that those apologies be accepted. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor. I now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I declare that motion carried. And welcome to Councillor Pannett, who's joining us online. Kia ora. Conflict of interest declarations. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to the items of the agenda. Does anyone have a conflict to declare? No. Moving on then to the confirmation of minutes. And I'm happy to move that the committee approves the minutes of the Wellington Region Waste Management and Minimisation Plan Joint Committee meeting held on the 9th of June 2025, having been circulated, and that they be taken as read and confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. Can I have a seconder for that one? Thank you, Councillor Swales. I'll put that motion, which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I declare the motion carried. And there's Councillor Cretney's just joined online, I can see there. Kia ora, Councillor.
Morning, team. Sorry I'm late.
All good. Okay, we have no public participation today, so we'll move into the general business. Item 2.1. Wellington Region Waste Management and Minimisation Plan 2023 to 2029 Progress Update, and I'll welcome Yvette Fallon to introduce the report with Stephanie Stedman and Jörn Scherzer. Kia ora koutou.
Tēnā koutou. This paper provides a progress update against the WMP, including the major projects update, a 6-monthly update on progress against the local action plans, and an update on central government. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, straight into it, folks. Does anyone have any questions? I have one, actually. Maybe I'll kick off and then come back to you, Councillor. Just digging a bit into the central government update, and clearly I'm not across the detail in the way that officers might be, but just looking in particular at the emergency waste funding section, and I know we have a piece of work underway to plan for what we will do with our waste in emergencies. But just noting that emergency waste funding, this is paragraph 32, will fund up to 60% of total eligible costs. Are we in a position, or as that piece of work progresses, will we quantify the other 40%, the money that we might have to come up with after emergency? Will we be figuring out exactly how much money that is that we need to prepare for?
Well, I might have to come back to you on that question, Councillor Mitchell. So the principal aim of the regional project is around how do we respond in an emergency, and looking at a particular site that has already been developed, has already been identified as part of the regional plan to manage emergency debris. How do we actually operationalise this? And normally the costs in relation to emergencies would just be funded out of council budgets, and it could be rates funding. We wouldn't be able to use waste levy funding for it, but we can use waste levy funding for initiatives in relation to resource recovery, and there may well be opportunities to do that, which is what that project is partly looking at. So if there is suddenly an event, there's a lot of waste coming in. Ideally, we don't just want all of that going to landfill. We want to see if we can divert as much as possible to preserve that landfill space. So that's kind of the main objective of that project, rather than the funding question. Normally, the remaining funding would just come from rates funding, if you like, to respond to emergencies. So in this case, a bigger share of this could be funded from the central government, because that's been allowed now compared to previously where it wasn't able to be used for that purpose.
Thank you. I guess, yeah, just moving forward, that cost of responding to an emergency needs to be part of our thinking and planning as well. I know that many councils kind of keep a bit of debt up their sleeve in this region in particular for dealing with emergencies, but that's all of the things, including the ongoing handling of waste. Just one more question on that topic, because I noted too, there's a list in paragraph 34 of things that funding will not be provided for, and that includes privately owned and operated waste infrastructure. For example, our recycling processing plant, I guess, and much of the hardware that our collection services use is owned by them and not by our councils. Do our contracts for those services require them to be fully insured so they can get back up and running quickly after an emergency event?
Yes, so some of those companies will or should have insurance, and a lot of times that's required through our contracts with them. What I'll do is we'll take this question away and have a talk about this in terms of the scoping of that regional project to see whether there's any gaps missing that we might have missed.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hayward, you had a question?
Thank you. Mātou upoko mehe kai kanihira, mehe kai mahi katoa. Ngā mihi moto take kei konei. Thank you for the items presented and the effort behind it. I have one specific question, but I may come back later on to cover it. And it's more, it may sit within the local action plans, but it's with regards to organic waste diversion. I note in the report the mahi by Wellington City Council and the potential that it will may be a private operator that may take up, depending on decisions in the next triennium, to provide that service rather than an in-house based service. I'm trying to dumb it down for the sake of those on the YouTube. Has there been any work on the criteria around the request for proposal with specific regard to the methodology that any provider would be using? I'm particularly concerned about what approach a private provider would take in terms of organic processing, and I'd like to get some sunlight on that. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So yes, there's been a lot of work done on what those evaluation criteria are and what the requirements are. So it would be helpful if you could narrow down, is it in terms of the environmental performance or end use?
More around the technology that's been utilised to process it. So, for instance, some will feel like anaerobic would be a preferred option to, say, vermiculture and so forth. There are a range of different technologies that are utilised. Do our criteria specify which technologies, or give guidance to those operators on which technologies would be preferred?
Sure. So the documentation has been really clear that it's technology agnostic. So we haven't specified what kind of technology should be used.
So following on from that, I take it from one of your previous points that there may be language in the criteria around end use. Perhaps you could go into greater detail about that, noting that there may be some in our communities who will be concerned around the quality of the product that is produced at the end in terms of its microbiological activity, the ability to have microbiological, so it's not inert from that perspective.
So the procurement, just taking a step back, so the procurement has already gone through the first three stages, and right from the get-go, the process has been technology agnostic. So it was about putting forward the range of technologies, and there have been a range of technologies, and then based on the criteria and the evaluation, this has been whittled down a little bit to a point now where we're ready to go to stage 4, which is only shortlisted providers provide the final response to that RFP, and that's yet to be completed. That's still to come. When it comes to the end markets in the earlier stages, again, it's been very agnostic. the key point was there need to be end markets. So you can't just produce something and then walk away from it, and someone else needs to figure out what to do with it. It was always very clear that we want to have a clear pathway, chain of custody, if you like. And so that was part of the evaluation. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the evaluation basically, preferred one over the other. So there's different avenues, and looking at two different technologies like composting versus anaerobic digestion, the end markets and the end products are very, very different. So the procurement process had to be cognizant that you can't, the criteria need to be broad enough to be able to cater for all of them.
Thank you. Appreciate the complexity and the need to be agile in this process, so as to, as you quite rightly point out, not leave this at in a cul-de-sac. That actually, if we want to maintain that circular approach with regards to waste, we definitely need customers, or at least end users of that waste. Would it be officers' positions in perspective of those responsible for this project, that irrespective of what solution is picked up, that for those communities who are concerned about wanting to have access to, for instance, compost that has a non-biologically inert component, that they would still be able to, through their own community networks and their own mechanisms, to be able to do that, but that should be made clear that this is to deal with the vast amount of volume that's coming from households and commercial sites that's normally going into landfill, and that there is a world in which both community and council can live with regards to the reduction of waste ending up in landfill.
So in principle, the procurement for this processing solution is really to cater for the vast majority of the material that would be collected. It doesn't exclude managing this material differently, and there are already some providers, all but at a very small scale, that collect material which is then composted in community gardens and other systems. That doesn't have to change. That can still coexist. And if particular households want to, not fill up the FOGO bin, assuming it gets in, it's in place at some point, and then divert this material to their local community compost, they can continue to do that. There's nothing stopping that. And so there is an alternative path for some of that material. But we also know that right at this very point in time, a very, very small proportion of material actually takes that path, and that's why we're looking at the FOGO collection and processing service. It's easy to say, well, why don't we just do community compost for everyone? Well, if it was that easy, it would already be in place, and we wouldn't literally have in the Lower Hutt area, if we're talking about 22,000 tonnes of waste per year, about 50% of that is FOGO. Well, we're still getting that material to the landfill, so clearly the system as it currently operates is not working.
One last question, if possible, but noting that the reason why I've been asking this line of questioning is just so we get it all on the record. Sorry to act like a lawyer and ask a question that I already knew the answer to, but it's so that people who are watching this understand that actually this isn't a one-on-one choice here. This is actually part of a plethora of tasks that we are trying to do as well. The last bit is, and again, this will be another question that will be easily, you already know the answer to, the proposals that are being currently worked on through the project group allow for the type of scale that other councils who have not been necessarily at the forefront of this project could come in and connect to, notwithstanding the fact that a private provider would need to build that capacity to meet that demand themselves, as opposed to a council-led process.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pannett's got her hand up online. Morena.
Thank you, and apologies for my absence today. I took this seriously being the chair, but I am sick, and as is my family. Look, I've actually already asked lots of questions, so you'll be relieved I'm not going to ask a lot more now. I just did want to go back to the covering report, though, about the fund for supporting the shift to organics. Jan, are you confident from discussions with MFE that if a private provider comes along, as we've talked about, that they might be able to get the millions needed? The report notes that projects over $10 million may not be funded.
You carefully choose my words now. So MFE's process is MFE's process. I don't think we're in a position to say we're confident that they will provide the funding to whoever is going to apply for funding at some point after this procurement process has been completed. What we can say that there is funding available, there are some criteria, and I can't see a reason why, regardless of whether a council invests or a private party invests, if that processing solution then enables councils to roll out a collection service and start diverting this material, then I can't see a reason why it couldn't be funded, because it will result in a step change, and ultimately you can take the opposite case and say, well, if the funding isn't available, which is the case up till now, if someone asks, well, why isn't there a processing solution? It's because there's not enough funding there, and there hasn't been enough drive to make it get it over the line. So ultimately, there is a role for government to play, and I think once the procurement process is completed, it's the stage 4. I'm pretty confident that there will be a solution that will come out on top, and that may well be worth funding because it will result in a step change that we currently don't have.
Thank you. And are you, similarly with that same level of confidence, happy that there won't be a massive gap between what the market might provide and the government? Because that's probably where my concern is. As you know, I'm quite worried about this private solution, just see it as high risk.
I can't really comment on whether there will be a gap. I think we're going to have to go through this last stage of the procurement stage between Wellington and Hutt City Council, and then see what solution comes out on top, or is the preferred supplier to invest in that technology. And I'm pretty confident that the funding will be sufficient to get it over the line. Ultimately, it needs to stand up commercially as well. It can't just be a solution that is effectively subsidised through the ratepayer or the taxpayer in the end. Council will pay for the collection service and the processing of the material, but we also need to realise that Hutt and Wellington are only a relatively small share in the grand scheme of things. So a regional processing solution will have to cater for other councils, other commercial sources of organic waste. And so that solution has to stand up commercially. So I would expect the supplier that ultimately will, whoever the preferred supplier is, will have already thought about how they're going to invest in this. And it won't just be reliant on government funding to do that.
Sorry, Andy, just another question for now, and I can go back on the list. And that is also my worry. I'm glad that they will be thinking about it, but will we have to then go back to the drawing board if they can't find enough partners to make the business case work, to go back to a more local solution for councils? Because we don't want to stop because a private operator can't make the commercial case.
I'm not sure what the question is.
The question is, have we got a plan B, really? Because there is a lot of risk in relying on a private operator finding all these other clients. I mean, hopefully they will. Everyone needs to be engaging in this process, but it's a lot of different parts. And the point of having the council-controlled option was to eliminate that risk.
So, okay. Wellington has looked at that local processing solution, and they did, run the numbers through it. Ultimately, on the 7th of August, Wellington decided that it is still currently the best option to push forward with the regional procurement. And so my view is that we need to go through that last stage of the procurement and actually get an answer on, okay, well, what's it going to cost and what is the preferred solution? And then you compare that against the business case that was developed some time ago now. And in Wellington's case, they also have a funding envelope where you say, okay, well, this is what we have estimated the service will cost, and then we're comparing that. And if it's within that framework, then we're good. And if it's outside the framework, outside of that cost envelope, then even Wellington has said we need to go back to our council and reassess. So if there is no viable solution identified as part of that final procurement stage, then I would say there's no reason why we can't go back and look at alternatives, including our local processing solution that Wellington has already looked at. So just because we're currently moving forward with that regional procurement doesn't mean that at some stage we can't reassess and go back to another if that procurement doesn't result in a viable solution. So I think all options are ultimately still on the table, I would say.
Okay, that's good. And really, this is also for the benefit of the committee, just because you weren't obviously at the debate. Andy, if I could just go back on the list after other people have asked questions. Thank you.
Sure. Before we move on from FOGO, Ewan, obviously we're looking at this to serve our own purposes first, our curbside collections of our cities. Do we have a feel, though, and I guess maybe based on what's going into our landfills, roughly what the ratio is of food and organic waste from our households compared to the commercial sector or elsewhere?
Well, maybe I'll ask them in two parts. I might have to check with my team whether they've got those numbers handy. But
or even just roughly.
From a household perspective, it's about 55% is food and green organics in your curbside bins, and that's even with some green waste already diverted through green waste bins. So it's a sizable proportion, and I don't know about the volumes for Wellington, but for Hutt, we're talking about 22,000 tonnes of rubbish, including FOGO, going to the landfill currently, and theoretically about half of that could be divertible, although realistically you're never going to get all of it. When it comes to the commercial sector, without having the numbers in front of me, it will be bigger in terms of volumes than what's coming through the residential service. And just going back to the early stages of when we looked at the business case for this, I was always very clear that rolling out a food and green organics collection service is really only the enabler for some of that commercial waste to be diverted later on. It's easy to say, well, why don't we just divert all this commercial waste and it's going to get most of the problem is taken away. But the reality is there is no organics processing solution. No one's investing it at the moment because it's just not viable. No one will utilize it because it's not cost effective. So we effectively, councils, for want of a better word, have the ability to roll out a service, and that secures a certain amount of volume, which will basically become the base load for a facility yet to be built. And that then, once the facility is there, enables other waste volumes from commercial sources to also go into that diversion opportunity. So it's a two-step process with curbside residential coming first, and that then enabling a phase two, which is about diverting commercial sources, which are actually larger in terms of the methane generation potential compared to the residential sources. Is there anything else to add?
I'm not too sure on Wellington City Council's or the Southern Landfill volumes. We can have a look at past documents and see if we can find the volumes, but agree, the volumes from the commercial sector are likely to be significantly higher.
Greater, yeah. And I guess that was my real question. Certainly we can enable it by guaranteeing our volumes, but over time we'll actually be a smaller part of the customer base potentially than the commercial sector in terms of volumes of waste anyway. Thank you for that response. I'll just ask a couple of questions. Oh, did you have any questions? No? A couple of questions too, because we've kind of swung back round into the right area of the report. There's a report in here about some work that MFE have done about baseline reporting for C&D waste, and I say not so much new information, but certainly a reminder that approximately 70% of the waste going to our landfills is from C&D. Do we as a region have enough of a focus on C&D waste, given it is the vast majority of what's filling up our landfills? Are we putting enough effort into getting that C&D waste? When we talk about kind of FOGO in comparison, I think it's a very small, we've got a lot of focus on a very small part of it. Are we putting enough effort into C&D? Or is the government putting enough effort into supporting us to divert C&D from our landfills?
Okay, before answering that question, let's just go and look at the wider waste picture. So one of the reasons why councils focus on FOGO is because it's an easier area. When I say easy in inverted commas, don't get me wrong, it's an easier area to control in the sense that we can roll out a food and green organics collection service, and therefore, we can capture some of this material and a certain amount of that will go into that processing solution. Just before I answer that C&D question. When it comes to C&D waste, councils are actually one step removed because it's effectively, you've got businesses that generate C&D waste, and some of us may operate a landfill, but we've got no way of controlling that waste stream. We have no influence. We can influence, but we certainly can't control it in any way. We have a regional bylaw, which does require the implementation of that requirement around waste minimisation plans for larger developments, usually above 2 million. Most of us have that in place, although most of it hasn't been implemented yet. That's a sort of a regulatory way of, can we encourage businesses to think about how they're managing this waste? But we can't force them, or we can't force anyone to divert it. That's ultimately driven by commercial factors, and that's landfill cost versus what's the alternative. So when it comes to, do we have the right amount of focus across the region on the C&D waste? I think we do, but we also need to be cognizant that we can control some things and we can't control other things. So the things we can control is we can advocate, we can influence, we can put some regulatory levers in place, but we can't control the market in the sense that the cost of disposal is what it is, and unless there is a cheaper, more cost-effective alternative, there won't be a lot of diversion. There are some projects in train, the Porirua one in particular. At this point, we're looking at opening around about December, and once that facility is in place, it will be the first time really in the Wellington region where there is some processing capacity for that material to be split into streams to go to other markets, whether that's treated timber going to co-incineration in Golden Bay or gyp being, going into some composting process. So there's different alternatives, but those markets usually are far away, and one of the reasons why it hasn't stacked up in the past is because disposal has been so cheap. So I think we have the right balance. Ideally, when I speak to all the officers, when we go through our steering group meetings, there's usually like, what else can we do? And there isn't a silver bullet. We can only encourage, and there are some projects in place like the Porirua one. Waste Management is working on this proposal at Manor Park, and that involves C&D diversion. There's another project at Silverstream that we're looking at for a potential soil and aggregate facility that Fulton Hogan has proposed. But they ultimately rely on the private sector investing. They're not going to put their money into it unless there is some commercial viability. It has to stack up in relation to the alternative, which is disposal in landfills.
Thank you. Councillor Swales, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So I want to go back to the fund that the ministry has got, and when I look at the criteria of it, we know that a couple of councils have invested in pilot schemes with organic waste and then processing it into composting. If they want to actually upskill and develop and make it into a bigger facility that can take more, I see that the examples of funding don't allow that there's any support for that. Why would they not? Because I'm looking at the examples of what they would fund, knowing that we've got Rosie and our, rohi, and I'm just wondering that if they wanted to actually start taking more curbside food organics, that they would have to upscale, but there's no money for them. How do we get MFE to look at actually opening it up to a business case where someone wants to build on what they've got but increase the facility or capacity? Is there any way that this entity can help support that?
Not sure how best to answer this. I mean, ultimately, the MFE funding criteria are their own criteria, so we don't really have any influence over what they do and don't fund. I guess we've put in place a process for at least the two councils, Hutt City and Wellington, and we've been working with MFE as part of our organics processing solution to potentially secure some funding towards that. We do know that MFE there's a preference towards more than just a council project, so cross-regional or cross-council to give it more scale. We already know that. So I guess the question for those other projects, if they are interested to secure funding from MFE, is probably to have a conversation with MFE and then figure out whether or not there is potential to receive that. That's probably my advice to them.
So looking at, the RFP that Wellington City Council are going to be putting out in support of organics, is there a business case out there or an entity out there that is actually looking at developing a business case or actually developing something from scratch? Because that's where the bulk of this money is from MFE, so that they can actually, to try and get the money at a scale that we want to do a regional organic collection is going to be quite a huge investment, right? So are there any entities out there that are looking at starting from scratch? Because according to the funding here, if they're already existing, they don't get money.
Just due to probity requirements, we can't really give any more details around who the potential applicants are.
Don't want to know who they are, but are there people interested in starting something like that?
Again, I think that's probably on shaky ground from a probity point of view, sorry.
We'll go back to Councillor Pannett online. I think you had some more questions, Ona.
Yeah, just one more. Look, I appreciate we are outgoing councillors, except for Councillor Mitchell, and new councils will have priorities, and there is a process to be set out. But we have agreed to a 6-year plan. So, can I just double check that officers will be very vigorous around the C&D work program, because as it's been mentioned, that's where we can get some really good gains. Great about Pareto, but we've still got a lot more work to do. Thanks.
I think we are being vigorous, yes, because there is a number of projects in play, whether that's an EDL trial potential at Silverstream that we're currently still investigating, whether it's the soil and aggregate facility that we're looking at with Fulton Hogan, whether that's the Porirua facility around C&D diversion, the project in Kapiti and Onahanga that's already started a couple of years ago. Actually, this is a couple of years ago now, isn't it? So there are a number of projects in play. What I just remind the council of, though, is that there are some things that councils can't control. We can be the enabler, or we can advocate and influence, but some of the infrastructure we can't put in place ourselves. I don't think that's necessarily a council role. Ultimately, it has to stand up commercially for it to be durable.
Can I just ask a supplementary? I get that, like, money doesn't grow on trees, but we have to deal with the problem too. And sometimes then it means that councils or government have to step in if the private sector can't make it work. Would you see some merit in that argument?
I can't comment on that argument, Councillor. That, as I said, we are doing what we can, and if councillors, different city and district councils want us to do more, then we can do more. But at the moment, the mandate that we've got is, as we have stated in the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan, and if there is a desire to go beyond that, then there is a process to be worked through on that.
Sorry, Andy, I've just got one more question. It just occurred to me. It's really good that we're doing the work on emergency management. I'm really concerned about that because we could have a major earthquake any time. Are you confident, just from an official perspective, that we'd be able to quickly stand up systems to deal with our waste, if that earthquake happens in the next couple of years? Just while we get ourselves, all organised.
Well, there are plans in place for REMO and from a civil defence perspective, so I don't think it's necessarily we're operating in a vacuum. The plan or the regional project that we're working on is really to go beyond just how do we manage debris and dispose of that material, is how do we actually divert some of that before it gets to that point, and have in place some plans to enable that. So that's probably the value add at the moment, rather than what we normally do, which is like there's an earthquake or there is a flood event or a slip, and everything just gets loaded on a truck and taken away.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hayward has another question.
Kia ora no. So I forgot to raise this in the previous section of questions just regarding to the organic waste diversion solution. One other question that came up that I thought about was obviously security of that service delivery is something that as councils we will be very mindful of, notwithstanding the fact that we have to kind of be a leader, noting the point that officers have made earlier, so as to help catalyse further efforts downstream with other private providers with regards to their organic waste. What criteria do we have around the eventual contract structures around terminations of contracts and the timeframes around that? Short timeframes give us as councils less time to come up with alternate solutions, but that will be very uncomfortable to a commercial provider. There is a clear tension between here. What we are officers in that type of the conversation thus far, without, and I would like an answer, without circumventing the probity that has been pointed out already with regards to the process thus far.
So in terms of the procurement process so far, a key aspect of that is it needs to be a long-term solution. So we have actually, it is about 20 years plus. And that ultimately will have to be reflected in the contract, because no one will really invest if councils only go out there and say, we want you to process 3 years worth of material and build this grand plant to do this, and in 3 years we might go somewhere else. Are very unlikely that anyone's going to invest. So the procurement has been set up on a very long time frame, and we're talking 20-year, so 20 plus 5 type of arrangement. So that provides surety for councils in terms of having a long-term solution, but it also provides certainty for business to say, well, once we've got this, we have certainty of investment to put this in place for the long term.
So, obviously, do officers still believe that there may very well be a risk that there is a market disruption that may mean that end users may no longer want to use the products that are provided by the supplier that is eventually contracted, and that creates a problem for individual councils in terms of ensuring the continued level of service with regards to diversion? How does that get articulated in this for decision makers like ourselves, especially considering the next triennium?
Right. So that is a risk, that ultimately whatever solution is identified as the preferred one technological developments over time may make that unviable, or may mean that others go for a different technology in the meantime. I don't think it's a very high risk, because the technologies to process FOGO material are actually well known and understood. I mean, there are some new technologies coming on the market, something like, for example, in Australia, they're also looking at the soldier larvae. My understanding is that that's not necessarily commercial yet. So there are questions like that. We can't foresee the future. We don't know, how this is going to play out. But in the current context, the technologies are reasonably actually very well understood, and they're used in overseas jurisdiction to a much higher degree than they are in New Zealand. So based on that, I think there is actually a good chance that they will work and be workable for quite a long period of time. And so there's a risk, but there's also a risk of a tsunami and other risks that may impact that technology in other ways. So that's just something that needs to be managed.
Appreciate that, and it's good to disclose that there is a level of risk, even though albeit it may be a relatively minor one, and the mitigations may very well be there. In a related fashion, it's not so much about the technologies that I was alluding to, but perhaps around the processing and the business practices of an operator. And I allude to the example of glass recycling, where many councils had gone down the pathway of having a uniform bin for all glass collection, and then it became apparent that the end users wanted to have glass sorted by colour, and a uniform bin did not allow that to happen easily. It became impracticable. So it became effectively, because of practice, not because of technology, a suboptimal solution. Is there also a risk with regards to processes and so forth, especially when we start to talk about the next step after a facility, which is household collection from the council's perspective, around that possibility also occurring with organic waste?
I think the risk is different to the glass example that you mentioned. I'm familiar with that particular issue, and I think part of it is that there wasn't enough thought put into the end markets of this product. So collecting glass by just a large wheelie bin is obviously much more cost effective than doing a curbside colour sort. But then you end up with the mixed glass streams, and that's actually the value of that product is a lot lower, which is one of the reasons why for the FOGO procurement we are very, very cognizant of we need to think about the end markets. It's not just about collection. A lot of times when we talk about FOGO, we're just talking about how do we collect the stuff. And it's actually quite easy to roll out another bin or another wheelie bin. That is the easy part of the project. The issue is how do you go from collection to processing this material, and what's made out of the product, whether that's a compost material that goes into agriculture or some other end product. So hand on heart, I think we've thought very deeply about this as part of the procurement process and the business case process for this particular project, to avoid this very issue that you've alluded to with glass, is that collected in a particular way and it's cheap and easy, but then no one wants it. So.
Thank you. Just coming back to an earlier point about the fact that new technologies are always coming along, I guess a benefit of us looking to a third-party provider is that we aren't going to be the owners of any redundant technology. Not that I'm saying it will ever be redundant. There will always be a market for compost coming out the end of any kind of system. Just in terms of that, though, when we would go out and procure a third-party service like this, what would be the typical lifetime of a contract that we would commit to up front with our volumes enough to get them up and running? What would be the lifetime of our contract that, is it 10 years or 20 years down the track where if there is actually a better option, we could consider shifting to something else?
For this particular project in the FOGO space, it's been about 20 plus years. And that's just due to the level of investment requirement to actually get something up and running. The co-collection service itself, when it comes to collection vehicles, to amortise the equipment, you're talking like 5 to 10 years, probably more like 10 years rather than 20.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back and question another of the MFE reports that we've got, which is to do with recycling behaviour trends. And to be honest, I found it fairly alarming, the research they had done when you think about contamination. This is in paragraph 51, the graph there, that 87% of people would typically put clothing into a recycling bin, and hopefully they're not doing that every week because it's clothing, but 77% of people would put soft plastic frozen vegetable bags into a recycling bin, which probably is every week. So just in terms of addressing that, and this is nationwide data, I had two questions actually. One was, do we have localised data from MFE? And the second one is, do we plan to respond to this in any way by advertising to our residents that particularly these very high volume contaminants don't go into a recycling bin?
We'll answer it in two parts. Yvette's going to talk to the stats.
I was just going to clarify that with that graph, the bottom is them answering it correctly. So they're saying no, that they wouldn't put it in for 87%.
It still indicates there are 13% that get it wrong, which is too high. So that does indicate that behaviour change in education is an ongoing challenge. It's not something you just do one-off and then you walk away from it. And talking from personal experience with our service in the hut, over the last 4 years since we rolled out the new service, we have managed to reduce contamination from a high of 17% to now 13 last year. In the last 3 months, we've been in the 12s, 11.9 in fact. So I'm very pleased with that, but it's a result of an ongoing effort to tackle that contamination issue, and it never really goes away because you have people moving into the city. There's constant change, so you kind of continually need to be at it. And unfortunately, some of the products that are also on the market don't make it easier. So you have a soft plastic item that might be made from PET, so it's got a 1 or a 2 on it, and because we have very hard pushed the line of 1, 2, and 5, put it in your recycling bin. People then forget, well, but we say no soft plastics, but this one's got a 1 or a 2 on it. So what is the resident to do? So there is these sort of market changes really create a lot of confusion too, and we're constantly battling that.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry for reading that graph the wrong way. So it's the other end of the graph. We've still got more than half of people would put juice containers into a recycling bin, and just under half would put coffee cups in there. So, yeah, I guess my question still is, are we planning a targeted response to this now that we've got this quite useful data in terms of communicating to people what those next biggest things they shouldn't put into a recycling bin are in terms of contaminants?
Not from a regional perspective, but each council that operates the service, really, that's their role to play, and it's up to them to decide the level of investment they want to put into that.
Yeah, and these are national trends, obviously, national data, and I think there has been some national advertising about the standardisation of curbside recycling, but do we know from MFE if what they have planned in terms of ongoing or upcoming advertising in terms of curbside recycling?
There has been some, but yeah, some of it was curtailed as well and cut short, if you like. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it certainly wasn't as much as I anticipated. It was such a big thing to standardise across the whole country, and then we kind of feel like we missed a bit of an opportunity there. Councillor Swales, do you have another question?
You've actually answered it. It was looking at what is the messaging that we're doing as a collective out there. I know that councils are doing their own messaging, but I was hoping that there was stronger messaging coming that was more unified from this committee. I thought that it was something that we were working on.
Oh, statement.
Well, consider that a statement. I had one statement to make, but I'm going to couch it as a question, which is actually a final thing, which was an overall observation of the local action reports. And there are a couple of things in a couple of different councils' reports, which essentially was, we plan to do this thing, and now we've decided not to do it, and we've marked it as complete. Complete in my mind is we plan to do a thing and we have done it and now it's complete. I wondered, should we have a category in there that is actually cancelled, I guess it is, for those councils? I think when we get to the end of our period and want to be transparent with our communities, if we say, you know, we completed 90 things, but actually 10 of them we completed by not doing them, that's kind of sending it not quite as transparent as we could be. And I guess the other one is on hold. If councils put something on hold and have a genuine intent to kick it back up again within the lifetime of this plan, sure, it's on hold, but I don't know if they're all on hold or some of those have effectively been cancelled as well.
We'll take that away and we'll talk it through in our between the 8 different councils, make sure that we're consistent on the categorisation. And yeah, that makes sense to have a separate category on cancelled or changed.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? I can't see any more questions. If it's a comment on these papers before we go to the motions.
Kia ora anō. Just to reiterate some points that have been made previously as I reflected on this report. First of all, it is encouraging for Porirua City Council to be making progress on a C&D facility. It is, as has been pointed out, one of many parts in terms of the entire region, but I'm very proud to note that we are making progress. We cannot supersede a legislative process around resource consents, but I'm certainly for my part confident that that process will be positive and that come Christmas we will be able to start seeing a facility for the use of all. I would also note with regards to the local action plan in Porirua, the particular challenge that Porirua faces, it has happened for other councils from time in previous triennium as well, around the status of our landfill at Spicer. I'm going to be very careful that we, the next triennium, the council will have to make some, interesting choices around the future of that space, and that has an impact on other actions that are in our local action plan with regards to waste minimisation. So my hope is that we will maintain diligence on diversion in spite of those challenges as well. I'm glad that you raised the point about the behaviour trend survey. There is, I think, an opportunity for individual councils to review, and I'm glad to hear the officers are already, continue to have that corridor around additional communication. I had put down here the Love Food Hate Waste campaign was one that I was thinking of in particular. Let's not lose sight, however, that one of the biggest challenges to diversion is not necessarily a consumer or knowledge challenge, it's an equity challenge in terms of economic burden, and that for some whānau it's not about education in the first instance, it's the fact that they cannot actually afford to divert their general waste full stop, and that creates some suboptimal choices which involve contamination of recycling waste, which does a disservice to the entire city as well. Those burdens are palpable in Porirua, and I think that some of the work that has been done by Porirua City Council officers around trying to address that has been fruitful, but that's still going to be an issue notwithstanding. I'm happy to hold off there. I'll come back with any other additional comment later on. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Councillor Panna, I can see your hands back up. Do you have a question or a comment? You're on mute there, I think.
Sorry. I was just wanting to make a comment, but actually you haven't moved it, so I'll make my comment once you moved it. Thanks.
Okay, in that case, if there's no further questions, no, can't see any. I will move the recommendations that the committee 1, receive the information, 2, note the major projects update in attachment 1, 3, note the local action plan update attachment 2, and 4, note the central government update as well. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Councillor Panna, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Look, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for a hard 3 years' work. Look, we've had some pretty robust discussions, but I do feel that staff and councillors worked together to make some progress on this long-running agenda of ours. You know, I was just reflecting, I started trying to convince the council to not make capacity for 100 years for waste back in 2013. So, and I'm sure others have been going as long as I have as well. But I've really come to the conclusion through these processes that infrastructure has to happen. It's no good just educating people if the systems aren't there to help them. Councillor Hayward, your comment around equity is really important as a general thing, but just going into the future, you know, my view with climate change is that those equity issues will get worse. And so that's why you need the state or the council to step in and help people to do the right thing because it's just not going to be affordable. I think climate change will cause more poverty rather than lessen the burden. But I think we should be pretty proud. Thank you, Porirua, for getting on with that C&D facility. Wellington City Council has done some work too. I look forward to reading in the paper about Manor Park. And the organics is quite slow, but I just hope that those of you who are returning to this table will work really hard to get it off the ground because it's just so important, and we're now actually a region that's falling behind other places in the country. We're usually seen as being relatively well off and progressive, but we just really need to make some progress. And as I've said, I think there's quite a lot of risk in this space with having a private operator, but nevertheless, that is the option we've chosen, and we just need to keep progressing with that one. I think the local actions probably still got a few concerns that, you know, that we just have to keep putting pressure on our own councils to deliver. But look, any progress is progress, and that's appreciated. And staff, I do look. We really have had some robust discussions, but I do appreciate your commitment and getting things done, which is the most important thing. And just the last point that I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things. One is that I personally spent a lot of time helping with waste assessments and doing strategies and all the rest of it. I hope with when it comes to preparing the next plan that a lot of that can be short-circuited and sort of recycle what we've already done, just so that the focus can really be on delivering infrastructure and initiatives for people to reduce waste. And the last thing, this fizzled out, but I think whoever's around the table could try again to see if mana whenua want to at least send one person along to sit on this committee. I think the contribution they would be able to make would be amazing, and I think would really help us with the work. So I hope that if they have the capacity, there's a few complex issues to work through there, but if it can happen, that would be great. So thank you again, and it's good that we're just finally inching forward on some progress, and I just think if we keep going, we can do some amazing things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Halliday, do you plan to?
Yes.
Your mic's on already, so
Fantastic.
Go for it.
Certainly echoing Iona's words there as well. Been an interesting experience for me getting involved in this space sort of as you'd already started through the process. So it's been fantastic getting my head around this because it's a space I'm passionate about as well. And it's been awesome seeing the fantastic work that all the different councils and teams are doing. You know, our job really is to set up the processes, you know, ensure that the systems are working, and then get out the way for delivery. And I'm starting to see that momentum building now that we are getting out of the way, which is absolutely fantastic. Infrastructure, I can see opportunity there. You know, it'll be interesting to see how, with a bit of investigation, that we can see how opportunity could potentially be capitalised. That could be an individual council thing. I think for me, though, is around messaging, and I'd like to just flag maybe for the next triennium that it would be good, since we're a regional committee, if we can actually look at doing some regional messaging. So in other words, we're doing some maybe some campaigns about what you put in your bin, but we do it across all the different councils at the same time, maximising maybe even a bit of government support so that it's really a substantial message that we're getting out as such, because it's all part of the process of just getting people to change that mindset, just take responsibility for their own footprint, which to me is the key part to all the work that we're doing. Once we can get people taking that responsibility, that will manifest itself in many, many different ways. So from my end, thank you very much. Be interesting to see whether we're back here next triennium. That's the process we've now got to go through. Hopefully we will. But it's been a pleasure being here. Robbie, I know you're online. We've been busy going backwards and forwards and throwing ideas at each other while we've been doing this. Robbie, it's been an absolute pleasure working with you and your team as well up on the Kapiti Coast. Hopefully we'll see you here in a few months' time.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hayward, I think, had his hand up next.
Kia ora anō. Before I get into what I really wanted to talk about, I do just want to take a moment to appreciate the efforts of officers and those on the shovel from all of our councils. I'll reflect particularly on Porirua, but I think my comments will extend to all. It is not a sexy issue, waste, and it is also one where the consequences of our actions don't become real until much later on. There's the old expression that societies grow great when old men plant trees that they know they will not live under the shade of. The work of a regional approach to waste minimisation can be categorised not just in the volumes that end up in landfill, but the efforts that will have consequences for generations yet to come. I want you to know that your work is acknowledged, and thank you. I also want to take a moment because we're pending the will of the voters, except for Councillor Mitchell. Well done, you, bro. Elections are so much fun. I think that it would be a great disservice to not acknowledge the work of our outgoing chair. Councillor Pennant, get your tissues ready. This committee is, for me, a flotilla of 8 waka. And they all have their own challenges, sizes, propulsion systems and motivations as each of them are trying to navigate the choppy waters that we are in. Your leadership as chair has helped us to maintain focus and direction. I think when I reflect on your time as chair in this triennium, I think that you have set the platform. Yes, we have approved a plan and you've brought on board the reflections that you have had in previous times on this committee to not try and make the same mistakes again as you may see them. Setting that platform around an actual plan to drive down waste reduction is something that you should be thanked for. Furthermore, and you alluded to this in your speech earlier as well, the role of te ao Māori and our relationships, whether it be mana whenua, mata waka, he tangata whenua katoa. That is important, and I hope that I do believe in our conversations that your sincere efforts have made an impact in setting the platform for future conversations with iwi, with Māori, mata waka, to have their voice at this table in terms of oversight. I know that there will be a whole heap of mahi that you have done outside of this committee around the Wellington City Council, and that this should be seen, I think, in a sense, a culmination of the efforts that you have had focusing on waste reduction throughout your time around the council table. But I'm also mindful that just because you will not be wearing the korowai does not mean that you hold mana and your efforts outside of this table. I expect you to be an agitator in your post-council period. We are up for that. I liken your approach around the table to be like a kōpara, a bellbird, singing constantly, alerting, pushing, and getting out there. And there was a whakatauki I was trying to remember the phrase of, which is that he rite ki te kōpara e konei te ata, just like the bellbird sings at dawn. We haven't got to the full sunshine of a true circular waste reduction system. but I'd like to think we are at dawn. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Very well said. Councillor Swales has a comment as well.
Yes, and not as eloquent as my colleague around the table, and I won't even try and step into that space, so I'll keep my comments quite brief. With the changes of our officers that have been leading this work, I want to acknowledge the ones that were there in the space prior in this triennium. Their contributions were well received as well. But then to hand the baton over to the officers that are now chairing and pulling the work together, I'd like to acknowledge. I think the fact that we are 8 in the same waka and being able to plagiarise and share the knowledge, because our council has got some new people in place, is I'm sure they will take advantage of that knowledge around the table. My fear is, as Councillor Pennant has said, is that this is a journey that we need to keep our foot on the pedal to continue the work that we've started. It is halfway through the 6 years that we've done, and I'm not quite sure whether, as in the words of our chair before she leaves, have we done enough with the work that is on the table? So I want each council to reflect, knowing that next year we're going into our LTPs, that we actually continue to ensure that the money is there, that we just don't rely on the waste minimisation levy, that the resources are put in there, that we continue the work that we've committed to, and that we don't put things on hold or delay, which is what we're seeing in some of the projects here. So thank you for bringing that up, Andy. And then just to say, Iona, thank you for your leadership, the information that you've brought, and no doubt you will be an agitator to us. And we look forward to you zooming in or being here in the public forum to keep us honest. I hope I'm back here in the next triennium, but that will be up to my community to decide. But thank the officers for all the work that they've done in supporting the regional work that we've got in place. And I know that at times we've come across as a bit abrupt and a bit pushy, but you've served us well. So thank you very, very much for all the work. And I look forward to seeing who.
Thank you. I guess that comes back to me, and I feel now I should have prefigured that there's still another paper to come in this agenda before we kind of celebrate and go on spring break or whatever we're doing here. Summer holidays, school's out for summer. However, thank you, councillors, for your comments. All I can really do is reiterate our thanks to the officers, I guess, for the work that you're doing together and through this committee, and importantly in your own communities on the ground in your respective rohe there. And thanks to the Democratic Services team here at Wellington City Council for keeping us in line as well. So I'll just wrap it up there for now, other than to say, of course, that this paper is a progress update, and very important, as always, to note that we are making progress on a lot of fronts here. So thank you, everybody, for your mahi. So I will now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. Could all those in favour please say aye? Aye. Any opposed? I declare that motion carried. So we do have to move on to the item 2.2, the decision register updates and upcoming reports. It says in my notes here I should welcome Steph to introduce the report. Steph, do you have any comments on this one, or it's just for us to note?
Yeah, just to note, I will also just note that in the next upcoming meeting there will also be the governance arrangement paper coming for the new triennium. But
thank you. Councillor Pennant, is your hand gone up for a question here?
It was to come up with a comment, but actually, sorry, I'll wait till you introduce it.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? No? In that case, I'm happy to move the motion that the committee receives the information. Is there a seconder for that? I'll take it from you, Councillor Pennant. Last chance to second, and I'll give you the opportunity to comment as well.
Thank you. I'd love to second. Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Look, colleagues, thank you for your kind words. Much appreciated. And sorry, I should have said that I knew some time ago that I was going to be leaving, and so that's why I've been having conversations with you about who was coming back and who was leaving, I feel very confident that people sitting around the table will do a great job. So I hope you will come back, because it wastes so much time when we have to get a whole lot of people up to speed. So that I hope as soon as the dust settles post the election results, well before December, that you can put yourself forward and start thinking about what you're going to do for the next 3 years, just because the time is so short. And just because you've done a great job, and we're a very diverse group of people. We're not a whole lot of eco warriors, so that was brought a useful dynamic. And then maybe if someone, Councillor Hayward, maybe you could take a lead on thinking about how we approach mana whenua. Maybe we need to do it a different way, but let's try and get that started right from the beginning, because if governance arrangements are going to be set up, it would be good to actually see if we could get someone on board pretty quickly. I mean, it might not be possible to have 6 people, but even if one was or 2 were happy to do some of the work, that would be amazing. But yeah, just that would be my learning, is just to get onto it as quickly as possible, because the 3 years disappears. Kia ora.
Any further comments at this point? No. In that case, I will put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. I declare that motion carried. Okay, we are now almost at the conclusion of the meeting, so we've had a lot of closing comments, I'm sure. I'm not sure if anyone has anything further to say. However, I'll just wrap things up by reiterating the thanks that have been offered to our officers for your great work through this triennium. And to agree with Councillor Pannett, wishing those of you who are seeking re-election all the best. This is a committee that operates over a 6-year cycle, not a 3-year cycle, so I think any kind of succession and continuity we can get through the committee is very valuable, so hope to see some of you back around this table. And yes, so just reiterating our thanks to the officers, but also thanks to the elected members who have represented our 8 councils through this triennium, particularly those of you who have made the trip into Wellington to make sure we meet our quorum for every meeting, very important. And always nice to see everybody in person as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Iona, for being the navigator of this great flotilla that Councillor Hayward talked about earlier, and we wish you all the best, and expect to see you again around, maybe down the end of the table there behind the lectern in the next triennium. So thank you, everybody, and we will just conclude with our karakia, which is up on the screen. Me karakia tātou, unuhia, 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 ki te uru tapunui, kia wātia, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te arataka tū. Koiara e rongo, whakaerehia aki ki runga, kia wātia, aira kua wātia. Thank you very much, everybody. I declare the meeting closed at 10:44 a.m. Please, everybody who's in the room, stick around and join us for some kai.